Hello, good evening, everybody. I hope you can hear me and all is well out there in internet land. I am good to go at this side. I hope you are at yours as well. So, today we're doing an Ask Me Anything. This is another unplanned, unprompted. I'm just doing it because I figured it would be fun to do before we do the Rookery stream later on this evening. So, I asked over in Discord what we'd like to cover. There was a couple of suggestions, but something came up that I think we do need to cover, and that's Winds of Magic. So I'm going to get onto that a little bit later on in the stream. However, before we do get onto that, we have the normal blurb about how we're going to have super chats coming in, various questions coming in during the course of the stream. I'm going to be taking those in batches as I answer my way through. It's also worth noting that I'm fully aware that I do intend to do the Winds of Magic. I plan to pop that out approximately maybe about 6:15. We'll start that part. I'm going to be diving into in particular what the winds are attracted to, how they express inside people, and what happens when the winds go wild, and what it does to individuals, because I think that's a subject that hasn't really been discussed a lot, and there's been quite a few people asking me about it, so I figured let's get that done in this stream. I will say, though, that's a little bit after. I'm going to dive straight into the first super chats that have come in, and obviously with a big, huge thanks very much for any of those that do come in. But before I do dive into those, I'd just like to say, if you celebrate Christmas, Merry Christmas, or indeed whatever other festivity may be yours, may you have a happy holiday with those. I'm having a marvelous time at this side. We're getting all ready. I have, however, been spending most of my time doing writing just now. In particular, writing for RPG stuff. And if you want to know more about that, check the Rookery stream that I'll be doing right after this one, because somebody's already asked us over there, what are my big things that I'm looking forward to next year? And one of those is what I'm working on right now. Anyway, let's dive into our super chats. First one comes from Captain Magma Pyro. Thank you very much, Captain Magma. If you had to craft a whole new, non-existent Warhammer race out of nothing, what 3 core ideas would you base it on? Holy crap. So a non-existent one, so one that doesn't already exist inside the setting. So basically creating something entirely new. Gosh, that's actually a toughie, because Warhammer has covered an awful lot. And even when we look at all of the classic mythical stuff that they've done, it's... or ignored, it's generally popped up somewhere in one book or another. So we're looking for something that's entirely new. So it would probably be, if it was non-existent, something down in the Southlands. I would be looking to probably dive into some sort of Afro, really unique, interesting civilization, something that leans into the great civilizations that were in Africa. Throughout, again, you'd probably be looking for somewhere to use Warhammer's normal bases, somewhere around the Middle Ages, somewhere around there, because there's some great civilizations that could be used for at least a starting point of inspiration. But I definitely wouldn't be looking for a copy paste there, because that's not only lazy, there are better ways of doing it, particularly for Warhammer. So I'd probably be doing that, and I'd be looking to build something that stood as a counterpoint to what they're building in the East, to what they're building over in the West, although that's still got a lot of world building to do, and what's already been built in the old world. And I'd be looking to steer away from the old colonial ideas, because in many respects, as has been shown many times for the Southlands, it's very much a, if you wanted to have an equivalent, it's like a pre-colonial equivalent. And we could tie that through to the old ones in a variety of different ways. So that's probably where I would go, because I think it's one of the largest gaping holes in the setting. One hopes that places like Ind and Koresh will be picked up by Total War, but the Southlands is this just open wasteland that nobody has ever really touched. So I would probably go there. Okay, Archie Maggio. Hello, Archie Maggio. Hi, Andy. How do the winds interact with each other? Could a clever, talented Imperial wizard use a single wind to shape a different wind into a spell and get around the ban on using multiple winds? No, absolutely not. It's not how the winds work. The when you use your to use the language that was dropped in other books, your etheric organ, that was a particular line that was dropped by Vespasian Kant, I think, the Patriarch of the Light Order, your etheric organ. But when you're using your other senses to manipulate things, so for example, the winds of magic, you manipulate that single wind only, and you can't manipulate the other ones. You couldn't manipulate the other wind with it because you don't really perceive it per se. If you were manipulating and doing that, you would be using a different wind. And you would be more like an elf, for example, channeling multiple winds. Having said that, though, do be aware that humans can channel multiple winds of magic. They are capable of doing so. We've got multiple examples of this throughout the lore. It's just illegal in the Empire, and for potentially very good reason. You tend to find that when humans use more than one wind of magic, it almost always results in corruption, dar, and a whole host of other horrible things. But as it stands here, and as it stands with the current lore, the answer is no. But, and I always feel it's worth adding a but whenever we're discussing magic, and I don't mean a giant but, and I cannot lie. In this particular instance, I mean, when it comes to magic, there's always another way of doing things, a story that can be told, something unique that an individual can come up with. So I think that for all I say no here, I think that individually I could probably create a good story where someone has found a way of sort of doing this. In many respects, that's what the dwarves do, after all. The dwarves take the 8 winds of magic and bind them down into their runes without channeling. They do it through a variety of other methods. And there is nothing saying that humanity can't and doesn't do something similar with the things that they do. So again, if you've come to the stream a little bit later, we're going to be picking up winds of magic, particularly as a topic at around about 6:15 my time. So that's about 25 minutes into the stream from where I am currently. And we're going to be discussing the winds and what they're attracted to in particular. So you don't need to ask questions about that because I'm doing it. And we're going to be discussing what also happens when the winds go out of control. Anyway, thanks very much for that one, Archmago, Maggio, not sure. Hi Andy, in terms of magical power, where'd you put Wurzag? Good old Wurzag. Okay, so he is a shaman lord. He's a 4th level shaman inside the Warhammer 8 rules, which means he's at the very top tier. There's only one spellcaster pretty much in the entire game that is given a specific level higher than him, and that's Nagash, and that's N times Nagash at that. No other spellcasters are really popped up beyond that level. There's lots of others who do various things. Teclis, he kicks at level 5 for a variety of things. And there's a variety of artifacts in the game that take you up and beyond, and have done all the way since the 4th edition of Warhammer Fantasy Battle. Warhammer Fantasy Battle, and earlier than that as well, there was always 4 levels of wizard, the top level being 4, and they were the most powerful ones. So as far as orc shamans go, he's top tier. There are no better. Now, if it came to an actual duel, one side would probably win, but it's quite possible that a different side would win on the next time they met. So in terms of magical power, he's right up there. Not much else to be said in that one. Clark Cokin, thank you very much for the generous super chat. Enormously appreciated. Can you talk about Imperial wizards and civilian work? Yeah. Can they take on private jobs, and what sort of work do they do? For some orders, I can think of obvious answers. For others, not so much. So the answer to this is absolutely. The colleges of magic were founded 200 years before the blowing up of the world, approximately. All the way back in 2302 IC is when it sort of starts, but they're not really founded until a couple of years after that. Because Teclis, Finrayr, and Yertle start doing the teaching at that 2302, but the colleges are founded after. And they were founded to create war wizards, weapons. Basically, every single last one of the wizards that the Empire builds is created to be a state army soldier. They're given effective rank in the army, and whenever the various states go to war, they can be called upon to go to war also. However, there is peacetime, as much as that means anything inside the war. Big stress on Warhammer world. And there's also some wizards who are very much suited for doing different styles of jobs, and indeed they do. All of the colleges have got people that are not frontline wizards. You've also got to remember that frontline wizards come in more than one stripe. We have our proper top-tier battle wizards who are exceedingly rare. Our Balthazar Gelts, our Thyrus Gormans, our 4th level wizards, or alternatively our Vespasian Cant, as we were discussing from previous in the stream. And they're all our 4th level wizards if we're going in Warhammer parlance, as in the fantasy battle game. They're all the top-tier ones. But there's a bunch of really low-tier ones as well. and a bunch of wizards who graduate through the colleges but aren't really that good at it. They're not really soldiers. And many of them, particularly for colleges that aren't very martial, are no good in a soldier lineup at all, but they can throw spells, and that's potentially useful. But some of their spells that they can throw, not so useful in the slightest. So yes, many of them take civilian jobs, and ultimately they are at the disposal of the elector counts, who in turn allow their various nobles to use them in a variety of ways, and some of them do private stuff, and all of the colleges have representatives who do just normal stuff. And each of the colleges are reflected in different ways. Some are almost pretty much built into imperial society in a variety of ways. Others are barely seen at all. And if you go through the various colleges, they all do different things. The Light College, for example, most of its free time for non-wartime is spent teaching other light wizards. They are renowned for it over at the Light College, and they have a significantly larger number of apprentices than almost any of the other colleges, because their wind is so hard to channel. They have so many that come in. They have all of their various apprentices becoming cantors, and the choristers are singing that wind into place in the college for the rest of the wizards who are actually putting it in place. But many of their number act as teachers, and they also act as teachers elsewhere. Light College wizards can be found all over the place in that regard. If we go to, say, the Druids, our Jade College, although some people prefer to call them Elementalists, depending on which version that you go with, the Jade College are much less doing standard jobs and more doing jobs out there that their college is responsible for effectively doing, like tending all of the various stone circles and so on. So that's one example, or helping various local field work or whatever it might be. The Grey College work as advisors, as diplomats, in fact, as a host of people fronting roles. It's very common to see them effectively taking up the role of vizier, sitting upon the shoulder of a noble, providing advice. They are known for their wisdom, but they're also known for being exceedingly itinerant. So it's very common to find them going from place to place to place to place, Gandalfing their way around the Warhammer world. Our gold wizards are often alchemists. They're working inside courts. They are providing potions. They are creating things. Basically, they're the builders and of the magic world, and they're the ones who are supporting all of the other colleges through that. They don't necessarily make the same sort of potions as, say, the Jade College do, but they definitely do make those too. The Celestial Wizard is the classic wizard advisor, providing fortunes for the rich and the powerful, and they are found in many, many courts across the Empire. Bright Wizards are almost always martially supporting others, so they might be in private armies or acting as an advisor when it comes to military matters. Our Amethyst Wizards are obviously thanatologists. They're dealing with death. They're dealing with things moving on to the next step. They're all about transition, those wizards. But they, many of the jobs that you'd expect to potentially find them in are covered with mostly non-college people, like the Mourners Guild, for example, in the Empire, very powerful in various cities, different guilds obviously in each one. Some of those have got Amethyst Wizards in them, but most of them don't. And the Mourners Guild in particular is far more closely tied with the Cult of Mor. And obviously our Amber Wizards are off doing their own thing in the wild, being crazy. But yes, they can take private jobs, all manner of them. What time are we at? So we're not onto the wizard chat. We'll continue on. I've already done that one. I wonder why that one popped up again. Go figure. Okay, moving down to Cole. Hey, Cole Patterson, just make sure we haven't got a Twitch one there. We have not. Okay, Cole Patterson, ask Santa Claus for Dark Deeds. Yay! What was it like to work with him? And did I get to go to the North Pole? Sadly, when we were organizing Santa Claus's order for Dark Deeds, I wasn't responsible for working with him directly, because Dark Deeds is distributed by Modiphius. Modiphius, who are our partners on that game. If I pull out, this is a pre-production copy actually, not sure why this one's here. If I bring that up to the camera, you'll see our name in one corner, the Rookery, and over on the other side you'll see Modiphius Entertainment. So they did the publishing of the game. So they were the ones responsible for going over to Santa and organizing his big order for everybody. So if you're getting your one from Santa, you can thank Santa's elves who have been talking to Modiphius. And indeed, you can pick up your own copy of Dark Deeds, because I feel I should say it at least once, over at modiphius.co.uk or modiphius.com. If you're in the US or order from the US, use .com. If you're in the UK or order from the UK, use .co.uk. If you're a retailer, You can also contact the Divius directly because they've got themselves a retailer section in their wholesale department. So you can just go and buy the copies directly from them to sell in your shop, which would be lovely. Moving down to Baron von Bastard. Thank you very much, Baron VB. Appreciated. Evening from England and evening from Scotland. If I invited all the Warhammer legendary lords to a house party... Oh, just imagine it. I can see them all swilling around like there's some game of Blood Bowl going on. Who will cause problems first? The orcs. I mean, they're where it's going to start. The orcs. I mean, they're just going to kick it off almost instantly. The dwarves will be on the orcs. It would be awful. And arguably maybe even the dwarves, because the orcs are there. I mean, they're eyeing the elves suspiciously, but then they see the greenskins and then the fights ensue. Yeah, some species in the Warhammer world just do not mix under any circumstances. Some of them are, you'd expect, quite incapable of mixing, but may have methods where they will and stories where they will, but almost always greenskins are spoiling for a reason to fight. And if you put them all together, yeah, it's going to be the orc. So you can pretty much choose your orc character. It's going to be one of those. Freaking hilarious. Okay, we're about 15 minutes away from when I'll do the Winds of Magic chat. We know how the winds can corrupt, yes, but how can they bring out the good in individuals? So I'm going to cover this one, Vault Boy, to a degree when I go through each of the Winds of Magic in about 15 minutes from now. Because I'm going to be explaining how each of the Winds of Magic is attracted to certain things, and the things that they are attracted to, they in essence also redouble within people. So if a wind has a positive aspect, which all of the winds do, they have positive sides and negative sides. Those positive aspects can be redoubled within someone. So I will cover that as we get down to that. And if you don't think I've covered it well enough, call me out, and rightly so. Thank you very much for the super chat. Simon Parkinson, happy belated birthday. Thank you very much. I am now officially old. Next year's the really big one for me. I was looking through some photographs today, and I regret it because there were some old photographs of myself from not that long ago, and there was no white in my beard. Today, yeah, my beard's pretty white. I mean, it's not white yet. I'm not that far, but it's not the ginger, almost browny beard I once had. No, it has become this sort of white thing, and yeah, I'm old. But I'm not quite as old as I could be. Next year's the really big old birthday. But thank you very much. How does a new mage choose their wind? Depends on which version of the lore you go with. Different writers have tackled this in different ways. I think that the most general way of saying it is, according to some, let's go with, say, humans, because humans are generally the base standard. You have strengths and weaknesses with certain winds, and you arrive at a college, they try to teach you, it might fail, you go to another one, it will succeed. But more often, you'll find that somebody has unleashed a great swelling of magic by mistake. In classic X-Men fashion, through their teens, they do something exceedingly awful, like burn someone out or something equally horrific, and a wizard comes along and says, well, you need to go to the colleges, or a priest of Sigmar comes along, and if they're doing what they're supposed to do, take them to the colleges, or alternatively, they burn them, particularly if they've caused local harm. I mean, if, for example, you are a burgeoning pyromancer to be, and you wake up one morning having had a terrible dream, and you've burnt out your house and killed your family, it's quite likely the locals are going to be a bit upset with you. But that is the starting point for some bright wizards. So they start in an area and they're taken to the appropriate college to what they've demonstrated, because there's no easy test, although some wizards are capable of seeing the ability in others to use magic. There's no way you can just go up to them with a detect-o-matic and say, aha, yes, oh well, look at this. Yes, you're a wizard, off to the colleges you go. That's not quite how it works. It tends to be some sort of event that occurs. The colleges themselves rarely take anyone over the age of 25 in, because by that time they've already settled down and they're never going to be wizards. So up to the age of 25, something happens and it sends you off to one of the colleges normally. Other species are completely different. Elves have got the ability to channel all 8 winds of magic, and all of them can do this to some degree or another. If we're talking in world, it's probably different strengths and weaknesses, and some elves will focus on the winds that they're better at and eventually learn how to combine all 8 winds into what would hopefully become high magic, assuming that's the route that they go down, particularly if they go to the White Tower of Safri over in Safri in Ulthuan. But having said all of that, not all elves do it. So there is no choose per se. It sort of happens to them. Although occasionally you'll find that certain wizards have chosen. They go to a college because it has a particular outcome. There are cheats as well that those who have perhaps found a method of channeling more than one wind can do by failing to graduate in one college, going to another, but learning everything that that college teaches. There's a couple of characters inside the Warhammer world. Zavant Coniger, for example, studied at the colleges of magic and more than one of them. So there are different ways that you can approach it, but broadly speaking, it's an innate talent. And you have a talent with one of the winds. And hopefully, if you're a human, you get trained how to use the wind you're good at. And if you don't, you're going to struggle. Sometimes people move from college to college, though. It's a bit of a long, winding answer there. Captain Magma Pyro again. Hello! Does every wind have its own incarnate elemental? Absolutely. And there's probably more incarnate elementals than just those 8 winds would suggest, but we can get onto that afterwards when we get onto the winds of magic itself. Mr. Grumbler, thank you very much. Are you familiar with Peter Fehervari and the fact I don't know how to pronounce his name suggests? No, I'm not familiar. Dark Coil, no, I'm not. What do you think of him and his depiction of chaos? I'm sorry to say, not familiar with his work. As the warp aether, the foundation of reality, is the opposite, or is the opposite the truth? So is the warp the foundation of reality in the Warhammer world? Now that's an interesting question, and it's a question that isn't answered. There is many suggestions for the foundation point and different myths in the Warhammer world. Some myths claim that the gods created the world. Take the elven cosmology, for example. They claim that Azurin, the great emperor of the gods, created everything, including the other gods. And he is the great judge that sits across all of it, stands above them on his throne, atop his mighty pyramid, with his bifurcated mask of black and white, with bow in one hand and sword in the other. He's a pretty terrifying figure. Truly terrifying figure. And this is the one that possessed Anarion and kicked ass and chewed gum when he manifested in the Warhammer world through him. He was also attached to many myths before that, but according to that, he created the world, and he is ultimately an etheric entity. So you could argue that immateria came before materia if you go with that. If you go with the old one route, the old ones arrived at a world that was primordial and changed it into something different. And the old ones themselves were something that were both material and immaterial. So if you go with that one, they both sort of happen at once. There's also various myths that suggest that the immaterial side didn't exist at all to begin with, and it was spun from the minds of the conscious entities that lived within the Warhammer world. So you've got another potential story, which is that the material realm came first. And I think that is the correct answer. Not the material came first, that there is no certain answer. And it works better for Warhammer that way anyway, because it allows all of those myths to sit side by side, hand in hand, and create a deeper, richer tapestry. Now, is there an actual truth? I mean, no, there isn't until some writer claims there is. And I reckon you could almost certainly, even if a truth was claimed to be the case, undermine it with a different truth that was written at a later date anyway. So the answer is all of the above, and sadly, in this case, I don't know the source work that you're referencing. I apologize. Alrighty, the bloke person, thank you very much for the super chat. Would you say the Lady of the Lake is one of the most active gods in the lives of mortals? Others work in mysterious ways, whereas she's personally handing out blessings and weapons to her servants. Yes, she is. So, one of the most active, yes, I agree. In fact, the bloke person, I would say that the Lady of the Lake is relatively unique. There's a couple of things that we can say as well. I'm going to drop in a big heavy spoiler warning here. The Lady of the Lake is officially one of the elven gods. And it was the elven god that in one story was given right to stay in the Warhammer world under the name Ladriel. If we go with the end times version, it's not Ladriel, it's a different god who pretended to be Ladriel. It gets complicated. But loosely speaking, an elven god was given the right to stay in the Warhammer world after Azurin banned all gods from the Warhammer world during the War in Heaven. Again, that's a story that could be changed in time and almost certainly will be, but that's what it currently stands as. Meaning that we have a god that we actually have history for being allowed to stay in the Warhammer world and being able to do stuff. But it's not the only god that kicks around doing things. Ulrich, for example, if we go with all the myths, is one of the few gods that's also on the Warhammer world, and actively so, and engaging with mortals, but in a far more intimate way than the Lady of the Lake. The Lady of the Lake holds court, and she holds a court where various humans are there, various elves are arguably there too, depending which version we go with, and all manner of mythical creatures, and it moves around Britonia, and sort of sits on the cusp of the aether. So it's not in the real world, it's not in the material world, and it's certainly not in the realm of the gods, and it sort of sits somewhere in between, and she hides there, moves from place to place, and occasionally pops out of water and throws swords at people in a rather watery bent fashion. Ulrich, by comparison, pops in and has sex with people and kicks people in and generally is wandering around having a laugh, if you believe many of the more extreme Ulrichans. So there are examples of several gods, but I think your core point here, most active, definitely one of. So we're about 5 minutes away from when I'm going to dive into magic, so I'll answer another couple and then we'll dive into the magic chat, because I'm quite looking forward to this chat. It's going to be a good one. Theo Bonora, thank you very much, Theo. Super appreciated. Hi, Andy. To this day, I still remember my first White Dwarf, as do I. It revolved around the Storm of Chaos campaign. I remember that one. That was, oh, cripes. What date was that? That's Storm of Chaos, so 2000 and whatever. I rarely heard it mentioned afterwards. Yeah. Could we get a history lesson on the subject? Okay, broadly speaking, the Storm of Chaos was a summer campaign, which was Games Workshop getting everybody from around the world to play games of Warhammer. They then took those results and they applied the results to the setting. So the core of the campaign was Archaon was leading a bunch of Chaos guys down south to Middenheim to have a big Barney. And they had a big fight, and Archaon loses and retreats to Brass Keep. That's the be-all and end-all of it. There's fights all over the world also happening, but that's the core of what the Storm of Chaos was. It happened in the year 2522 and was, at that time, an interesting campaign where I think many folk thought Chaos would do better. It absolutely didn't. Chaos got their ass handed to them badly. They did terribly in that particular combat. And it initially made a change in the world, and the summer campaign that happened after that sort of took it into account and happened many years later. I think the next summer campaign happened in like 2537, I guess. I think it was. So it's almost 15 years after the Storm of Chaos, and the Storm of Chaos still stood. Then they did more work, and they pretty much eradicated all of it. And they said all those things that we said happened with the Storm of Chaos and with that big crazy crown that Alaric the Mad made, all that has been retconned. It didn't happen at all. Here's a new edition of Warhammer. Let's go. And the Storm of Chaos disappeared, and the setting was reset to 5 minutes to midnight. As in, the great coming of Archaon is about to occur. It's yet to occur, because many saw the failure of the Storm of Chaos as almost a defanging of Archaon. It made him look rubbish, and it really did make him look pretty rubbish. They wanted Archaon to be a proper, considerable threat, so they just wiped it all out, started again, meaning that the next edition of Warhammer, all of the Storm of Chaos vanished. So loosely speaking, the Storm of Chaos was a summer campaign that had people do big fights from all over the world. Archaon came down, got his ass handed to him in Middenheim. There was orcs involved. There was Manfred von Karstein involved as well. A whole bunch of other things. And it was retconned, which is why we never see it again. But it got its own book, the Storm of Chaos campaign, and all the details that were inside there have flitted in and out of the canon of work at various points. But now the Storm of Chaos book is broadly perceived, to all the detail in it, to be definitely canon, because it got referenced in lots of other books. So even if the Storm of Chaos itself got retconned, all the content that it used pretty much stands. So I hope that helped you out a little bit there. I'm going to do one more, and then I shall dive into the topic of the day, and then we'll get back to our super chats. Archammer 123. Yes, could you expand a bit on pink and orange wins? They've been mentioned before. I get some sense they were folded into the main 8. So they never existed. They do exist. It's one of those weird things. So originally, the setup for the Winds of Magic, as it was presented all the way back in, I forget the White Dwarf number now, That's bugging me now. I'll check it up later. The original article, which as I recall was Brian Ansell and Rick Peastley who put that one together. It was 8 Winds of Magic, and it's the 8 Winds of Magic we know and love today. That's it. Done. Other writers later, though, started running around with the lore and realizing that there was holes in the lore. Particularly when, as the lore expanded, extra magic was added, and each extra magic started to erode at the concept of only 8 types of magic plus high and dark. In the very original conception of it, it was a big wheel of magic, the 8 winds, with high above and dark below, and they moved in cones, so to speak, each siphoning the 8 winds in different ways to create different effects. That got changed, obviously, with different editions. But as the different editions came out with other types of magic, say ice magic, for example, as a single example, it eroded at the core concept of there just being 8 winds. And other writers started picking up that concept and saying, well, what else could there be? For example, Marian van Stauffer wrote some interesting articles on not just the Winds of Magic. He wrote the Liber Chaotica. He wrote the Liber Necris. He also did some stuff for Inferno magazine. And included in one of those was a nice article about the Lingua Prestantia, which showed that there was extra bits and pieces of color, like, for example, Orch for the orange angle, or sleeve for the pink. And undercurrent to that was that humanity could perceive 8 winds of magic, and that's just what it's like, in the same way that we as humans have got very poor ability to see a whole host of real world light. For example, we can't see greeny red. It's an actual color that exists out there, but because of the way the cones work in our eyes, we see green or red. We can't see the two combined together as one single color. You can almost fake it if you're someone who's capable of looking at a magic eye picture. You can take a red side and a blue side, or a green side, pardon me, overlap them and almost see that greeny red color that humans can't see. Equally, we don't obviously perceive into any view up to infrared. Purple isn't a real color. It doesn't exist in reality, but our brains make it up because of the way the cones of our eyes work. We perceive things in a way that is completely false. It's just wrong. We don't perceive the world as it is. We just see a very limited part of it, and what part of it that we see is entirely restricted by the way that our eyes are built. Elven eyes are built differently, so they perceive the world in a completely different way. And the general argument at that point was that elven perceptions for the etheric side were also different, capable of seeing far more than just the 8 winds of magic as we understand them. The winds themselves were understood to be a bit broader, in the same way that the spectrum is broader. If you say the color orange, that means different things to different people. Some people are going to almost fleshy tones for orange. Others are going to a deep sort of crimson-y type color, and they still call it orange. And then people say things like, what's pale orange? And everyone says, well, pale orange isn't its own color. And then someone says, well, what's pink? That's just pale red. That's not really a color. And everyone who knows pink as a color goes, no, pink's a color. They say, well, why is pale blue the same as blue? That's not the same color. And it all gets complicated because spectrums are complicated. Language changes how we perceive things, and also our own perceptions change how we perceive things, and elves could see something more. The 8 winds were the 8 winds, but perhaps there was ways that they could be used that lie quite beyond what the 8 winds are known for. And to a degree that this is supported by, say, for example, the Cathayan lore, who use the 8 winds in very different ways, and you could argue that they are tapping different parts of it, which perhaps would, if you were an elf who viewed this great wind as one thing that's comprised of others, capable of pulling out other colors. But broadly speaking, there are no other winds officially. There's just none. There's the 8 winds of magic plus high and dark magic plus whatever else they decide to add each one of the editions. And often it's lots of other lores, some of which make no sense according to the color magic setup. But the pink and orange winds don't exist officially anymore by any stretch of the imagination. But that doesn't mean that I wouldn't be using them in my games because it works for a deeper cosmology. So I'd certainly be willing to do so. On that, I think that's a really nice lead up to the topic of the day, which is going to be Winds of Magic. And if I'm doing more Ask Me Anythings in the future, I might do this more often, as in have a little topic that we can dive into halfway through, because I think that's quite fun, so that we definitely have an idea of at least one thing that's going to be said. And today we're going to be discussing relatively quickly, because I'm going to be finishing this stream for 7 o'clock, because I'm going over to stream with the Rookery at 7 o'clock, and you are very welcome to come join us over in the Rookery if you'd like to do so. Lindsay, Andy, myself, and Mark Gibbons are going to be discussing our Christmas wish list, the things that we'd like to have, plus what we've thought of the last year, and hopefully what's coming next year. It's going to be super fun. But we're going to be discussing winds of magic, and I'm going to be taking each of the winds, and in particular discussing what they're attracted to, because this is something that's caused a lot of questions out there, because the 8 winds are often just perceived by their spells, as in, this is what this wind does. It is the wind of beasts, and it does beast things. But the winds of magic have a very real impact on the Warhammer world. So before I go into each one of the winds, I'm going to say, what are the winds of magic? So that at least we have a core grounding of where they come from, what they are, and how they work in the Warhammer world, because you might not know. Broadly speaking, the Warhammer world has 2 enormous rifts in reality at each of its poles. The story as to why doesn't matter. They just do. These are often called the Chaos Gates. And the Chaos Gates are a place where the real material world is imposed upon by the immaterial world that lies beyond. Because the Warhammer world is not just the physical world that everybody stomps around. It is also the realm that lies beyond, the extra dimension. Sometimes called the realm of chaos, is sometimes called the aether, sometimes called the immaterium. In fact, you'll find many of the words that 40k uses for their warp is very much originally grounded in words that Warhammer used as well. And you'll find a couple have come back from 40k, but most of them started in Warhammer. And the warp, the realm of chaos, the realm of the gods, this is also often called, is where all of the great spiritual entities live. That'll be gods, demons, spirits, strangely enough. They're all in the realms of what lies beyond the material realm. And when that realm impinges on the material realm through these great rifts, something happens. In particular, it's commonly described as magic floods the world. But what does that mean? It means that all of the stuff from the immaterial realm hits the material realm and becomes something. Because the material realm has rules, it has laws, it has physics, and it works in a particular way. And as irreality hits reality, as the immaterium hits the materium, it becomes something. And this something is the winds of magic. The winds of magic spread out from these poles and go across the world. And they swirl and they churn and they rain and they cloud up and they fall heavily in big thuds, depending on the type of magic at hand. And they all flow through the Warhammer world in different ways. And every single thing in the Warhammer world is absolutely suffused with magic. Even the least magical thing has the winds of magic within them. It is a core component of how the Warhammer world works. In fact, if we were to compare this with 40k, the Warhammer world is much, much, much more magical than 40k. 40k, you get your 1 psyker per million or whatever the various numbers are for each of the different grades of psyker. And the Warhammer world, magic users are much more common because the world is suffused with it. If you were to compare the 2 universes, the Warhammer world is by far the more magical and by far the individually more powerful. It's a ridiculous magical mess. And that's because magic is constantly flooding the world, but in a slightly controlled fashion from these gates. So that's basically where the winds of magic come from. And when the magic comes into the world, it splits and fragments into the 8 winds of magic that everybody knows. But it's a bit more complicated than that. We also have Dar, which is complicated. That's black magic, because each of the winds are associated with a color. So each of these winds have a tone. They have a way of being. And that's because the immaterial realm is created from the hopes, the dreams, the emotions of the material realm. What happens in the material realm directly influences the immaterial realm, the realm of the gods. And that direct impact comes back with the winds of magic. The winds of magic themselves are emotion in many respects. They're attracted to certain emotions, they're attracted to certain states, but it's also a material wind now. So it's attracted to the material stuff too. In the same way that magnets attract to each other or repel, the winds of magic are attracted to certain things and repelled by anything that attracts another wind. And I'll give you the best and cleanest example of this so that you understand it completely. Metal. Metal in the Warhammer world is a big no-no for wizards because there is a lore of metal. There is a wind of metal, Shaman. And Shaman, or Chamon if you want to go with how many people originally pronounced it. Shaman is attracted to metal, but that means all other winds of magic are repelled by metal. That means wizards can't wear armor unless they study the lore of metal, because all other magic types are repelled by it, and they try to channel in the wind, get it around from wherever it may be to them to make a spell. The metal gets in the way of doing that, meaning that wizards can't wear metal. And you might go, well, I should surely wear leather armor then. That means at least I can wear armor as a wizard. And the answer to that is, well, no, you can't, because leather attracts gur, which is the wind of beasts, because it's a dead animal, meaning that even that is not good enough. You have to go elsewhere if you're looking for something to hopefully be able to pull the winds through. Now, smaller amounts of this stuff don't make an enormous impact, but for wizards who are especially sensitive to just a single wind, they need to wear things that attracts that wind, particularly for, say, humans who are not as strong channelers as, say, elves. Elves are trying to draw all the winds, which means that they tend to wear clothing that is not repulsive to any of the winds at any one time, but at the same point will hopefully attract as much of it as they need to channel all of the various spells. So, loosely speaking, our winds of magic are attracted to different things. So let's discuss what they're attracted to. Each wind is quite different. Let's go with the obvious ones first. Let's go with, say, the amber wind first. Let's go in alphabetical order according to the colleges. That's a good way of doing it. The amber wind. So this is Gur. The amber wind Gur is attracted to atavism, brutality, cruelty, dominance, ferocity, frenzy, isolation, remoteness. What else can we go with? Wild animals, obviously, wildernesses. It is the wind of wild things, and that is what attracts it. So if you happen to be someone who is particularly dominant and likes to control things, you will find that you will attract the amber wind. And if there's a lot of the amber wind in the area, you will attract more, and it will make you more dominant. This is something that the winds of magic do in the Warhammer world that doesn't obviously happen in the real world. If you get a giant fire in the Warhammer world, it attracts the wind of magic associated with fire, actually, in great quantities, and that can keep the fire burning even if it has no fuel. That's basically how spells work. They take the wind of magic and they create a material effect. Meaning when there's high tides of the winds of magic coming through during a chaos incursion, for example, fires can just pop up all over the place even when there's no fuel. That's why when the winds of magic blow and the chaos incursions come in, everybody gets very, very concerned for more reasons than just everything's going a bit magical. Fires are starting. People are becoming more bestial and more dominant. Those who are already relatively dominant become more so. It brings out your worst traits. But that's just where it's attracted to. I'll get on to what happens when the wind goes wild in just a moment. Let's go over to amethyst, because that's next in the amber amethyst list. That's Shyish, the wind of death. Now, it's attracted to very different things. Battlefields, boundaries, clocks, because it's the wind of time as well. Death, gardens of Mor, because Mor is the god of death, so gardens of Mor are graveyards, so it's attracted to there. Gibbets, longing, reverence, respect, silence. Generally, all of these almost contemplative places attracts the wind of death. It's particularly attracted to points moving from one thing to another, boundaries, as I said. So the wind of death particularly rises at twilight and at dawn, for example, as we move from one transition to another. If you want to imagine it, think of tarot cards and the card death. Go look that up. Many of the associations for the wind of death are pretty much written into that. I'm going to move quickly because we're already coming up to past. Bright wind. So bright wind's easy. Actually, this is one that most people understand because it's anger, it's dynamism, it's arguments, it's excitement, it's heat, impulsiveness, fires, flames, passion, pride, being quite vehement. Bright wizards, when they're taken on, become angry and it attracts all of those things. And the reason I'm going through the things that it attracts is because if you get that wind put into you, this is what it brings out. So if you get, say, somebody channeling Gur into you, you will become more animalistic. If you get someone channeling amethyst wind into you, become far more contemplative, potentially reverent. Bright wind into you, become angrier. The celestial wind, Azir, that's the next wind, known for its lightning bolts in many parts. It's a far more complicated wind than that, though, because it's also the wind of telling the future and what might come portents. It's attracted to anticipation, something that might come. Clear skies, dreams, imagination, inspiration, inventiveness, hope, omens, patience, prophecies. It is attracted to all of those things and redoubles them when it gets into people. So somebody who's already dreamy becomes even more so. Someone who's already fearing what might come next as they're thinking of what comes up becomes even more so, might become an anxious mess. We then move over to gold, shaman. That's obviously heavy metals, gold itself, greed, experimentation, industry, logic, knowledge, science, what else? Obsessiveness, in particular obsessiveness, rationality, wealth. It is the wind of process. That's a good way of putting it. The processes that are put in place to get from one thing to another. Industry, moving from one thing to another thing. The gold wind is the wind of in many respects capitalism as well, the wind of the process that creates wealth out of it, and the greedy are often going to be attracting the gold wind to them. It's a very heavy wind as well. It drops down from the sky and thuds into metals, unlike say the bright wind, which tends to run like flames themselves shimmering around, or the amethyst wind, which gathers in dusty spiraling columns, or the amber wind gur, which is fast and cold. Anyway, moving on. Grey, Olgu. The grey wind is very misty and shadowy, and in some respects often gathers in big palls of fog. It reflects that character because it's all confusion and distrust. It moves with gales and independent thought, intrigue and lies, big banks of fog, shadows themselves, obviously it gathers in there, storms, and it's also attracted to wisdom, those who are very wise. The grey wind, again, it moves in and it tends to bring confusion and distrust and shadows and illusion wherever it gathers, and there's too much of it, it redoubles that again, so you get someone who may start off being relatively normal, but if they're already a bit paranoid, they become much more so. Jade, Gyron, this is the wind of life. This one is attracted to animals also because the life lives through them. The bones and the pelt and the material stuff gathers the gur, but the life and the fluids within them is what gathers the Gyron. Gyron falls like rain and moves in great channels across the world, and it sinks in through the roots of all the plants. It's sucked up like water and it's passed on like water. Animals can attract more than one wind, just like humans can attract more than one wind. Fecundity, friendship, healthiness in general, and often too much healthiness as things go ripe and plump and pop. Plant life, rain, soil, summer, stone circles, great ley lines, water in general gathers jade. And if we're just looking at the personal side of it, it's friendships, which might sound unexpected, but love also to a degree attracts jade wind, because ultimately it's tied very closely to fertility and creating new life too. Finally, we have light, the wind of Haish. Haish is strongly associated with religion, beauty, contemplation, enlightenment, faith, holiness, illumination, pacifism in particular, purity, pyramids, truth. This is a wind, though, that is potentially very dangerous in multiple ways. Not just because the diffuse nature of it, it barely can be seen. It's so diffuse, it just sits like light in a room, and you can barely see it or channel it. It needs great banks of pure individuals singing songs with perfect notes to gather it with any great amount. When it gathers in large amounts, it can lead to overthinking, because that's one of the great issues with the wind of what is effectively intelligence, your enlightenment within. And this is where I think we move on to the next part before I go back to my questions. And that's that each of the winds of magic can go way over the top. Particularly when we get a great storm of magic, or magic sweeping in from the Chaos Gates in the north and the south. And they can make people go very, very weird, which is the same as having too much of the wind channeled into you. And this is a specific question that's been asked repeatedly. And the easiest way to imagine this is to consider a normal person, okay, and I use the word normal with heavy quotation marks here, and consider what happens when you get yourself an abnormal process put into your mind. And the easiest way for most people to understand that is to go and start reading up about psychology and how abnormal thought processes create different results. So, and you can very quickly start going, right, so that's what happens, I suppose, when this occurs. So, for example, the amber wind, it makes people go very bestial, atavistic, very... When it goes mad, they go very animalistic. Classic zombie movies are a good place to go for if you want to see what it's like when the amber wind takes you over, because you become something that is down to animal instincts. You're feeding, you're fucking, you're doing the very basic stuff for survival. All higher thought has gone out as you become a creature more than the man that you would be. It's the opposite of the light wind in many regards. Amethyst, by comparison, you get too much of that and you're far likely to become depressed and despondent, contemplative of all the things that could come next, the changes that are coming. It's a wind of time. Amethyst, one very much as it swells up within you, makes you think about that a little bit too much. Depression is a good area to start with for when things go wrong there. Bright, again, relatively easy. You become enraged. You become frenzied. Frenzied in a very different way to the amber wind, because it's one that's born of fury. It's one that's born of a reason, although sometimes it will be without reason. You are just angry, and that's how it expressed. Celestial wind, though, that tends to be if that gets too wild, you become super anxious. You're really concerned about what's going to come next in a very different way to the depressed. Anxiety and depression may come hand in hand for many, but they are two very different pathologies. Then you move over to, say, the gold wind. Too much of that makes you super paranoid, because you are grey wind, sorry, makes you super paranoid. Don't get greys and gold mixed up. Makes you super paranoid. You are overthinking all of the different potentials that you might see before you, because it's the wind of illusions. You start to see things that simply aren't there in all the motivations of other people and all the things that are around you. You begin to doubt everything that is about you. So paranoia is a good place to start there. If we go over to, say, Gyron, obviously I completely missed gold. That's what I get for getting confused. Gold, let's do gold to make sure we don't let obsessiveness. It's the obvious one. We become obsessed with tiny details, the tiny details that make up the processes of the overall things. Our wizards become, if they, for example, are absolutely suffused with the wind, contemplated over tiny details that don't matter as they fuss over the smallest thing. As somebody who may have done a lot of art in my time, I understand this one intimately, because one of my biggest problems when I do art is I worry about the details and I end up doing a tiny bit of picture that's huge and I never finish it. And that is the other potential issue for the golds, that they get so caught up in the moment that they can't look at the bigger picture. We then move over towards the jades. The obvious jade outcome is becoming altogether too lusty. It's a nice way of putting it. They become too excessive in all of their appetites. And that's not just the obvious, hey, they've get all super sexy. And no, it's far beyond that. Slaanesh is very closely tied to many of the outcomes here, as is Nurgle. This is not a wind that's attached to just one of the Chaos Gods, after all. Although various iterations of the lore have attempted to do that. Excess and going far too far with something, that's what happens with Jade, typically. And then finally we have Light, which everyone goes, well, that's the one that's all religious and contemplative and good and beauty and illumination. You can't go too bad. Wrong. You can take things far too far. Effectively, you can become a total psychopath because your intellect overrides everything else, your emotion in many respects. Your intellect takes prominence, and often your intellect can lead you down some very dark paths when you go, well, the best thing for me is to kill that person, because they will no longer be an issue. And you can see why all of these 8 wins, as they rise up during the course of a great incursion of chaos, for example, cause enormous problems across the world. It's not just mutation is happening. It's not just fires are burning up in places and everybody's getting greedy because all of the metal is filled with Shamon. It makes them greedy for the metal and they want it, which is why gold has that great fascination for many. It gathers Shamon in great quantities. But it's that people are becoming depressed, enraged, anxious, obsessive, paranoid, lusty, psychopathic. They're going mad. The world is going mad. And those who are susceptible to any of the winds are slowly but surely being tainted. And as we all know, humanity is particularly susceptible to the winds of magic. Elves think they're separate to it, but even they respond to all of the particularly all of the mental aspects of it all, because they don't physically mutate, at least in most versions of the lore they don't, excepting in very, very rare circumstances. But they do mentally react in a variety of ways. But they are also aware of what magic does, so are capable of channeling it away from themselves. But during a great rise of the winds of magic, it can mince anyone anywhere, really. Poof! That was a really fast run through, and all throughout that I left Arkhammer's comment up. But we have a lot more comments, so I'm going to jump through those. If there are any about what I've just discussed at exceeding speed, do bring them into the comments. I'm sitting at about 20 minutes left for the stream, so I'm going to start diving through all of the other comments as well to make sure we get them. Biofood78, good morning, Andy. Good morning, Biofood. It's not morning here, but whatever. So it's evening here. We're sitting at 20 to 7 p.m. Laura said that the next Fishman discussion video was hidden somewhere in my rectum. Now the visit to the proctologist was educational, but she said she didn't see it up there. Do you think she's in on it? I think she is in on the Fishman conspiracy. I think you should go to get yourself a second opinion. Avanti DK, a non-Warhammer question. What non-Warhammer product were you involved with that people are not aware of that you are really proud of? No dark deeds. Well, I can't say dark deeds. Okay, I'll go for another one then. There's been a lot. Freeport, for example, from Green Ronin. I particularly enjoyed working on that because it was one of my first big mapping gigs and it won loads of awards and it was great. So Freeport is one. Critical Role, I enjoyed the mapping. I was involved right at the beginning before any other cartographers were. So I did a lot of the very first maps for their show, and I was delighted to be being brought back for one of their more recent books. So Critical Role, that was good. More recently, Solasta. Solasta's just got, if you watched the recent Game Awards, they just got their second game marked, Solasta 2, as I recall. Imaginatively named. It's got a subtitle. I haven't paid attention to it yet. I just know it was announced. We did the Rookery Publications did the Solasta RPG game for that, which is a D&D game, which is obviously not something I'm known for. But we did that, and you'll find Solasta is available from Modiphius right now if you want to go buy it. So I was pretty proud of that too. So yeah, I've done a lot of stuff, and a lot more beyond that. That's just some highlights, and for the things I haven't mentioned, I feel kind of bad for the people I've forgotten. What's the worst joke you've put in a game? So many. Oh, this one's really tough up Mornington Crescent because now I have to remember them. And my memory after COVID is like Swiss cheese. Sometimes it's nice and firm, but then you get a big hole and you're just left going, oh no. Worst joke. I tend to hide most of my jokes so that no one notices them. The same way that the Once Upon a Time family from from Bergenhafen. Most people miss that as a joke, but it means once upon a time. Once upon a time. The Once Upon a Times are a relatively missed joke, and I do those all over the place. But off the top of my head, I can't think of one Mornington Crescent, which is crazy because I've done so many. I mean, most of my games, half the characters are named after various things or joke references, and now my mind has gone blank. I will come back on that one probably over in Discord. Dynaman95, I was thinking of an idea for a story in the Warhammer world, but I've come to an issue, oh dear, I think might be quite common. I don't want to contradict the lore of current characters, understandable, so I want to set it in the past, also understandable. However, many of the cool concept units are described as being recent. Very true. Or tied to the current characters. Also true. How do you think it's best to get around this without just forgetting they are a recent invention like some writers do? Reiksguard, for example, often forgotten that they are relatively recent. They're not an old order in comparison to the great orders of the Empire, for example. There's a whole bunch of stuff in the Warhammer world that's very recent, and the answer to that is relatively easy. Make up something different that's possibly next door to what you're wanting to lean on. If you are desperate to use the thing and not want to contradict lore, you're just going to have to not set it in the past. I mean, it's as simple as that, Dynoman. There's no get around here. You either make up your own or you use the thing and you worry about contradicting the lore. There is no great worry with that, though. You'll find most writers don't worry about it. It's one of the reasons Games Workshop constantly contradicts itself, because it doesn't tell its authors that they need to read and write and understand everything. They just go, away you go, do your thing, and we'll tell you if it's okay. And often they will say yes to things that contradict the lore all over the place. So feel free to do the same yourself. There's no reason not to. But if you don't want to, then go back in the past, make your own stuff. Alex, finally ordered our deeds. Woohoo! Do the various winds affect non-humans in similar ways to humanity? Yes. Or is it just humans who have their personalities affected by the winds? No, it's not. So, great question, Alex. Everybody in the Warhammer world is influenced by the winds of magic. But what's different is their individual, their individual minds. Mental disorders express differently in different people. Someone who already has a mental disorder, if they have that redoubled by the winds of magic, are going to be much worse. But if you have a mind that is already relatively fixed and process driven like a dwarf, dwarves and shaman can almost come hand in hand. Their minds attract shaman in great quantities. They, in turn, also are attracted to the metal that's in the gold. Shaman and dwarves are really, really, really close. But dwarves themselves are absolutely incapable of perceiving, sensing, using the winds of magic beyond their obvious get-out clauses with things like runes and the like. So yes, but what happens when you take a mind that is alien to humanity and apply the changes to it? And that's questions you need to answer for each one of the species. Elven minds are completely alien to human minds, for example. Elves, if you take Gav Thorpe's example, for example, are trapped in this almost eternal teenagedom. They are never really capable of moving past the here and the now. Everything is always up there, and they're deeply emotional creatures. So what happens when you take that and you add some amber wind to it, or worse, you add bright wind to it? They become, if anything, more impulsive, more angry, more likely to react. The elves become, if anything, more prideful, depending on which wind you get in, or more depressed. They take all emotions and they take it further. If you have filled them with one of the winds, it's going to enhance that. So basically, take each one of the species and then go, what's their equivalent of being paranoid? What's an elven equivalent of being over paranoid in comparison to a human equivalent of being over paranoid? These are simple states: paranoid or anxious or excessive or bestial or psychopathic or whatever, but they're a good grounding point. Think about what each wind is attracted to and basically say, what happens if I have too much of that? If, for example, you've got jade and it's attracted to being friendly, what happens if you're just too friendly? Get a bit too handsy. And what does that mean to each one of the different species? Hopefully that helps a bit. Drosier, thank you very much. Drosier, appreciated. What cool things could wizards be seen doing in battlefields in Total War? The old world, pardon me, that would be different to post-founding of the colleges. Right, so many things. One of the things that I actually kind of regret that they've done is that they have just used the first edition Warhammer Fantasy roleplay and Warhammer 3rd edition magical setup to explore and detail all of their magic as a starting point, and they'll then hopefully build from that. But that misses out on many magic types that are already existent within the Warhammer world, some of which have been discussed in various roleplay books or similar. I think there should be many more. In fact, the easiest way to do it is just to take each one of the 8 winds of magic and go, what does this mean if you're not properly trained in it and you're drawing all winds and mixing it with this? Necromancy, for example, is a fine example of what happens when you go a little bit wrong with Shyish. Elementalism easily pops up from things like the bright wind, but we have other magics as well. The light wind clearly is a grounding force for demonology. The grey wind is clearly our illusionism. But what is, say, for example, amber, and how does that best reflect? Where's our shamans and what they do? So where's our druids from the jade wind beyond just the elementalist side? There's lots of other magic types that I feel like could easily have been dropped in and are an existing part of the Warhammer lore. Druids have long had their own type of magic, and although they've skipped in and out of the lore at different points, they're currently very much in currently published books. So do be aware there are different things that they could have done. All right, Phil drops in there. Looking from the outside, it seems like some of the lores have far more utility, especially range, than others. Actually versus Gyron, for example. Also, is it just me, or is Gyr the strangest domain? The cosmic forces of wild animals still love it, though. It's not just the cosmic forces of wild animals, though. It's them. It's also dominance and ferocity and wild places. Also, remoteness in particular, wilderness as in emptiness. It's something that is devoid of the higher stuff, devoid of all of the mental stuff. In many respects, it's the mental stuff pulled back and taken to an extreme. It's more than just wild animals. Wild animals is the easy part that we all understand it through. But you'll find that different wizards across the world will use it in different ways. Are they more useful than each other? Well, is Is one metal more useful than another metal in the real world? Yes, they have different applications and can be used for different things. Some of them will make great range spells. Shimon in particular, throw molten gold across a battlefield, searing doom your ass, that sucks. Or fireballs being thrown all over the place from fire. Then it comes to Gyron. It's a very different type of wind. It's going to be healing you instead of hurting you, normally speaking. You can flip it around though. It can also rot things, because that's one of the great joys of the winds. They don't just take one side, they take it too far too. So the green wind can rot stuff at a distance, and that includes rotting clothes right off you. Has very different styles of effect. So loosely speaking, yes, all of the winds are not equal, and that's the way it should be, and I'm happy with that. Wonder Alpha, I'm going to be closing off this stream relatively soon, so I'm going to speed up these last few to make sure I don't miss any. I'm going to be stopping around about the hour because I'm moving over to Rookery Publications to stream there, and we're going to be discussing what we want for the next year of gaming and what we ourselves are looking forward to our Christmas this year. It's a festive stream. It's going to be fun. It's going to be Lindsay, Andy, myself, and Mark Gibbons just having a little bit of fun. Do join us. If you're on YouTube, hopefully at the end of this video, it should just take you over there if you want to go. I will attempt to do a raid over on Twitch. I'm shit at this. I've done the raid wrong like 12 times so far, but I'll definitely give it a go to see if I do it wrong again, because hey, nothing wrong with trying, eh? So I will give it a quick go just to see if it works, but I'll probably screw my raid up. Okay. And how long can you get with /raid Rookery Publications? Yeah, who knows? So I'm gonna go through these relatively quickly. Hi, Wood Lucy from Discworld. Lucy? Oh dear, I don't know how to pronounce it. From Discworld, be an interesting template for an Eastern depiction of a time aspect Shice user. Sadly, my Discworld knowledge is only to some of the original books. I don't know that character, so my answer is going to be rubbish. Other than, sure. I'm going to answer slightly more generally, and that is, I find all media useful for inspiration. And I'm going to say yes to this even without reading it, because there's literally nothing that I'm not happy to read and go, oh, I could use that bit, and then merge it into something and create something unique, new, and interesting and fascinating. So I'm going to say yes regardless, but sadly don't know the character. I get caught up in the worlds I create myself. I so rarely read outside them as much as I probably should do. I do, however, consume games and movies and media in general like nobody's business, but don't have as much time to read as I used to, which is bad for me because I used to read so much. Right. Are elemental wizards associated with Tal? Desperate for Games Workshop to add Priests of Tal. Priests of Tal exist in the roleplay side, but they are barely mentioned outside of that, which sucks. Are they associated with them? Not really. I mean, they cross similar provinces and they do the same things. In Talabic land, for example, where the priesthood of Tal is centered, there's lots of very important Tal sites, like Tal's Deep, just to the south of Talapine. And Tal's Deep also has associations with the Druids, and the Druids are directly connected to the Jade College. So yes, there are associations there, but Tal priests are very much their own discrete unit, and whilst you could say all the wizards have connections to everything at some point or another, in this particular case I would say they are pretty much unique. I need to move quickly given the hour. Let's go down to Greg. Greg, we have steam power and electric power in Warhammer. Is there any refinery or petroleum industry in Warhammer Araby? Any diesel engines? As it stands, no, but that doesn't mean that they won't do something like that. We do have various analogues to sort of refinery things mentioned with dwarves, occasionally with Nuln, sometimes down Marienburg, but Araby's had so little detail we don't really have it. And I know your question's added with a little winky emoji, not very serious, but I like to answer the questions as they stand anyway. But do we have diesel engines? As it stands, again, probably not, but with magic we have access to things that you wouldn't normally expect, and with divinity we have even more access. One of the great mistakes of many people who play with the Warhammer world is to think that they're like medieval Europe and think like medieval Europe. It's not the case. They have real gods that have told them through revelation facts that the real world just never gets. They get access to knowledge that the real world never has. They know a host of things that the real world struggled with because they, through magic, can literally see or perceive it in a way that real world people can't, or through the gods have learned it in a way that real people haven't. But do be aware, there's magic screwing up with it as well. So many people are filled with nonsense as well. It's a world full of ignorance in a variety of ways. But it would not surprise me if it's in some pocket somewhere that there is definitely refined stuff going on. Captain Magma Pyro, this is very crackpot, but if Tzeentch is the god of magic, absolutely. All etheric beings are magical in nature, sure. Does that make them all fragments of it? So that's not a crackpot theory. That has been proposed by in character, as in people in the world at more than one point. Some Tzeentch individuals actually believe this. They believe that Tzeentch is the only god, and is a fractured, multi-headed hydra who basically appears as many different things at once. So the answer to this is, it's not crackpot. It's very possible real. Thanks very much for that one. Howdy, Andy. Sadly working today, so I have to watch the VOD. You can watch anytime you wish. I hope the stream goes well. Thank you. Would the oversaturation of the winds affect other races? Yes. All the species of the Warhammer world will be affected in some way or another, as we've discussed. What does a gnome as a familiar mean? Is he enslaved? Possibly. There's all manner of different ways that Games Workshop could resolve that. It could literally just be that the wizard is the familiar, not the gnome, and the gnome has just spun the wizard as an illusion, which I quite like as an answer. It's the gnome that's the character, not the wizard. Because I like twisting it around, obviously, because I kind of like gnomes. Chapter Grim. Who were the first patriarchs, matriarchs of the colleges of magic? Oh gosh, off the top of my head, I can't remember them all. So we have Volans for the Light College. We have Vontarnis for the Bright, sometimes the Grey, depending on which book that we go with. I can't remember the others off the top of my head. I will need to go check that one up, Chapter Grim. I don't think they're all named. I have a list for the LAWhammer version of them already, as I also have a list for the LAWhammer version for all of the patriarchs and matriarchs pretty much from the beginning. And that was based on everything that was existing, so I may be able to fish that out. I'll go check it out for you, Chapter Grim. Ping me over in Discord to chase up on that. Aleph Flux, and I am about to stop soon. You've said that winds can be genetic and that they can be emotional. Does that imply that there are ethnic and cultural suffusions of winds? Any you particularly call out? As in particular ethnicities and cultures that are more suffused with some winds than others? Assuming that's the question that you're going for, then yes. Absolutely. Certain people who think a certain way will attract certain winds. If your people are naturally more logical, are naturally more direct, and more naturally more process driven, you're attracting Shaman. If you are a very devout people, you're very spiritual, you believe yourselves to be pure, you're going to be pulling in more Haish than others. If your people are naturally suspicious, are naturally mistrusting, are naturally very doubtful of everything you see before you, Skaven, you pull in much more Ulgu. And indeed, each one of the winds has got something similar. If you're naturally more inventive, if you're naturally thinking about tomorrow rather than today, you're pulling in Azir. Each one of the winds attracts, and certain cultures have got cultural direction, often led by the gods that they revere, or the other way around, depending upon how you wish to build it. So the answer is broadly yes to that, and all of the species are doing that to a degree. Phil, we're going to have to rattle through these. So the winds are said to be less present near the equator. Yes, it is a bit strange considering the winds from the southern waste should go over the equatorial zones in the way of the vortex. But if we hold on to that, how would it affect magic users and traditions native to those areas? That's already been discussed in multiple places. Marianne actually goes through this at length when describing his version of Araby, where Araby, they don't use magic directly. They instead use weak magic to influence jinns, spirits, and similar. So they infuse them with the ability to do it, and they basically do magic through spirits, similar to how hags use spirits to do their spells so that the magic doesn't channel through them. So that's one response. There are still wizards, they're still capable of perceiving, using, doing stuff with magic. Many of them are using divine powers rather than material mad winds of magic powers, but yeah, there's different answers to that. Necromancer Cobalt, better question than my last. Would living close to the great magical vacuums of the world, like the vortex of them all, be better or worse for them than the winds get strong? Worse, because much more of the magic gets there. So they're not vacuums as in there's no magic there. They're vacuums in they're sucking in more world magic, and it's one of the reasons why Ulthuan was always destined to sink, Atlantis style, because Ulthuan is Atlantis, because at some point there'd be so much magic, it funnels into that big plug hole that is Ulthwood and just blows up. But it's not quite how they handled it with the end times. Oh gosh, I do need to move quickly. We know the magical greaseskids is said to be almost completely alien to other species. Yes, knowing that, how would you come to reconcile later association with Gur? I wouldn't. I personally favour the idea of the Winds of Beast eventually adapting itself to this strange magic. What are your thoughts? No, it attracts it. So the Gur is attracted to everything that the orcs are doing. There's no need to reconcile it per se. It already works within the setting and the way that it's set up. Ricky Chapman, if a Warhammer Fantasy roleplay game, we have a Dark Elf Beastmaster and they've been trying to break a Praetor with little success. Any advice for them? Patience. Elves have got all the time in the world. Villain, finally have my copy. Woo! Can't wait to play with friends. Also, what makes a shit different from the Horned Rat or a Chaos God? Go check our shit stream. I know that's a rubbish answer, but given that we're almost out of time, that's what I'm going to have to do. I'm going to drop into my last comment. What would you say the pink and orange one do? Watch LAWhammer. It will eventually come up because that's where it's going to go. I don't want to say because I have my own version for it. And with that, I've got to bring this stream to an end. I'm going to say thank you very much to absolutely everybody that turned up. I now need to go over to Rookery Publications. Do follow us over there. I'm going to try a raid. Let's see if that worked. A raid has been created. I'm now going to attempt to go and dial out of this one and go to the other one. So until next time, I'll see you later. Bye-bye.